I stood in the Vermont Lakeside Resort lobby, clutching 5 plastic room keys and my credit union Visa card. Snow swirled against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and a rustic antler chandelier cast warm light over the polished wood floors. My hands shook slightly as I tucked the receipt into my purse, $1,200, for a week-long family Christmas getaway. Worth every penny to spend the holidays with my children and grandchildren. "Mom, you're so slow!" Charles called from across the lobby, already heading toward the elevator with his wife Heather and my daughter Lisa's family. They laughed about something I couldn't hear, their voices echoing off the vaulted ceiling. I hurried toward them, my arthritis making each step careful on the slippery marble. "Wait for me," I called. But the elevator doors slid shut just as I reached them. Through the brass panels, I heard Heather's voice trailing upward. "Finally, some peace!" The next elevator took forever. When I finally made it to the third floor, the hallway was empty except for the sound of doors slamming and muffled conversations behind them. I found my room at the end of the corridor, the smallest one, naturally. Through the thin walls, I could hear Dan and Lisa settling their kids next door, while Charles and Heather's voices carried from across the hall. I sat on the narrow bed and looked around the cramped space. A tiny window faced the parking lot instead of the lake. The bathroom was barely large enough to turn around in. This was what I got for my $1,200, the leftover room nobody else wanted. But we were together for Christmas. That had to count for something. I unpacked my suitcase slowly, hanging my church dresses in the narrow closet and arranging my medications on the nightstand. Tomorrow would be better. We'd have breakfast together, maybe take a walk by the frozen lake. I'd brought my camera to capture memories of our first family vacation in years. A text buzzed on my phone. Sophie, my 16-year-old granddaughter. "Grandma, are you okay? I heard them talking downstairs." I typed back, "Just getting settled, sweetheart. See you at dinner." But something cold had settled in my chest, and it wasn't the December air leaking through the window frame. I decided to find the others and suggest we explore the resort together. The lobby bustled with families checking in, children pointing excitedly at the massive stone fireplace where stockings hung from the mantel. Christmas music played softly from hidden speakers. I spotted them in the lounge area, clustered around a low table with their drinks. Charles gestured broadly, telling some story that had everyone laughing. This was my chance to join the fun. "Room for one more?" I asked, approaching with what I hoped was a bright smile. The laughter died. Heather shifted her purse to take up more space on the couch. "Oh, Evelyn, you look exhausted. Maybe you should rest." "I'm fine," I said. "I thought we could—" "Actually, Mom," Charles interrupted. "We were just planning tomorrow's activities. Nothing too strenuous." He didn't meet my eyes. Lisa nodded. "The kids want to go snowmobiling. Very physical stuff." "I used to ski," I said quietly, "before your father got sick." An uncomfortable silence settled over the group. Dan cleared his throat. "Maybe there's a nice book in the gift shop. Something relaxing." I felt heat creep up my neck. "I didn't pay for this week to sit alone reading." "You paid?" Heather's voice carried a note of surprise that cut like a blade. Charles shot her a warning look. "What Mom means is, we all contributed to this great family time." But I'd caught it that moment of revelation. They'd assumed someone else was footing the bill. Not the retired nurse on a fixed income. Not the widow who'd scraped together overtime pay for months. I excused myself and walked to the massive windows overlooking the lake. Behind me, their conversation resumed in hushed tones. I caught fragments drama-free. "Easier this way." "She'll be fine." A church friend's words echoed in my mind from last Sunday. "Love without respect isn't family, Evelyn. It's just obligation." Standing there, watching snow fall on the frozen water, I felt something crack open inside my chest. Not my heart breaking something harder. Something that had been holding me together for too long. 3 weeks earlier, I'd stood in my suburban Massachusetts kitchen, dividing my latest overtime shift pay into labeled envelopes, groceries, utilities, church tithe, savings. The routine comforted me, the same system I'd used for 40 years of nursing, even after Robert died and the house grew too quiet. Charles had called while I was sliding apple pies into the oven for the church fundraiser. "Mom, we have an idea for Christmas." "Oh?" I'd balanced the phone between my ear and shoulder, checking the timer. "A family getaway. Vermont, this beautiful lakeside resort. The kids would love it." My heart had lifted. A real family Christmas, not just me heating frozen dinners and watching old movies. That sounds wonderful. The thing is, we need to book it under one name for the group rate. Would you mind handling the reservation? We'll all settle up later. I should have asked more questions. Should have insisted on seeing the breakdown of costs. Instead, I'd felt grateful to be included, needed for something beyond holiday cards and birthday gifts. Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need. The deposit had been $500. I'd used money from my small emergency fund, the one I'd been building since Robert's funeral. Then came the balance, another $700 for rooms, plus resort fees and taxes that somehow added up to $1,200 total. I'd stared at the final confirmation email, my stomach clenching. That was nearly 2 months of careful grocery shopping and skipped restaurants. But Charles had said they'd settle up. Family helped family. At the credit union the next day, I'd taken out a small secured loan, using my old nursing badge and retirement certificate as collateral. Jasmine Reed, the loan officer, had looked concerned. Mrs. Harris, you're sure about this? It's quite a bit for a vacation. It's not for me, I'd said. It's for family. Now, standing in that resort lounge, I realized no one had even asked about settling up. They'd simply assumed I'd cover it the foolish old woman grateful for their company. But I wasn't foolish anymore. The next morning, I woke early and dressed carefully my best sweater, the silver earrings Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. Today would be different. I'd make it different. I found them in the resort's diner-style cafe, already seated at a large round table with menus spread out. Sophie waved me over, but Charles held up a hand. Mom, you look tired still. Maybe grab something light and take it back to your room? I'm not tired, I said. I'd like to have breakfast with my family. Heather sighed audibly. It's just that we're discussing plans, and you know how you get when there's too much activity. How I get. I'd worked 12-hour shifts on my feet for decades, managed a household while Robert battled cancer, raised 2 children who apparently saw me as fragile and inconvenient. I'll just sit quietly, I said, pulling out an empty chair. Actually, all the seats are taken, Dan said quickly. The kids need room for their coloring books. I looked around the table. 2 empty chairs sat right there. My grandsons, 8 and 10, were playing games on their phones, not coloring anything. There's plenty of room, I said. Lisa avoided my eyes. Maybe the counter would be better? More privacy to enjoy your meal? They were steering me away. My own children, managing me like a difficult patient. I felt something hot and sharp rise in my throat. Fine, I said. I'll eat alone. Again. I ordered coffee and toast at the counter, sitting on a wobbly stool while my family laughed and planned their day 20 feet away. The teenage waitress kept glancing at me with sympathy that made everything worse. That's when Sophie appeared beside me, sliding her phone across the counter. On the screen was a group chat called No Drama Xmas. My daughter's name topped the participant list. The messages made my hands shake. Mom's room is perfect tiny and away from ours. She'll probably nap most of the time anyway. Best Christmas ever, no guilt trips or stories about Dad. My coffee turned bitter in my mouth. Back in my cramped room, I sat on the bed and read through more of the chat logs Sophie had shown me. Message after message, planning around me, discussing how to minimize my involvement in their family vacation. The vacation I'd paid for. She always makes everything about her, Lisa had written. Classic guilt trips, Charles had added. At least she's contained this way. My hands trembled as I scrolled. These were my children, the babies I'd rocked through fevers, the teenagers I'd driven to practices and dates, the adults I'd helped with down payments and emergencies. Arthritis pain shot through my knuckles as I gripped the phone. The cold room, the separate meals, the polite dismissals, it was all intentional. They'd used my money to buy themselves a week without me. A knock interrupted my spiral. Sophie's voice. Grandma, can I come in? I unlocked the door, and my granddaughter slipped inside, her AV Club backpack slung over her shoulder. At 16, she had her mother's determined chin and my own stubborn streak. I'm sorry, she said immediately. I know I shouldn't have shown you that, but I couldn't stand watching them treat you like this. How long? I asked. How long have they been talking about me this way? Sophie's face crumpled. Since they started planning the trip. Maybe longer. I sank into the room's single chair. I thought they wanted me here. They wanted your credit card, Sophie said bluntly. I heard Dad tell Mom it was perfect you'd pay, and they could manage you. The word hit like a slap. Manage. Not include, not celebrate with manage. I pulled out my spiral notebook, the one I'd carried through nursing school and 40 years of shifts. With shaking hands, I wrote 3 words: bank, lawyer, boundaries. Sophie watched me write. What are you going to do? I looked at my granddaughter, this brave girl who'd risked family anger to show me the truth. I'm going to remember who I am. She smiled, the first real smile I'd seen since arriving. Can I help? For the first time in months, I felt something other than loneliness. I felt clarity. Yes, sweetheart. You can. I spent the rest of the morning making phone calls. First, I called the credit union from the hotel's business center, where I could speak privately. Jasmine Reed, please, I told the receptionist. Mrs. Harris. Jasmine's voice was warm but professional. How can I help you today? I need to place a fraud alert on my account, I said, and document some transactions as authorized by me alone. I explained the situation carefully: the family trip, the group chat, the attempts to manage my spending. Jasmine listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. The hotel charge is legitimate? She asked. Yes, I made it voluntarily, but I'm concerned about potential disputes or chargebacks from family members who might claim I was confused or coerced. I'll add notes to your file. If anyone calls claiming friendly fraud or elder abuse, we'll refer them to this conversation. Do you have a case number you'd like me to log? Not yet, but I will. Next, I called the county clerk's office. They provided mobile notary services. Someone could come to the hotel to witness and stamp documents if needed. I scheduled an appointment for that evening. Then I researched estate attorneys online. I found Mr. Raj Patel, whose website mentioned elder rights and family financial disputes. His voicemail promised a return call within 24 hours. Sophie appeared beside me in the business center. Did you know there's a recording app on my phone? And I can export chat logs with timestamps? I looked at my granddaughter with new appreciation. You've been thinking about this. I've been watching them treat you badly for months, Grandma. Every family gathering, every phone call. They love you, but they don't respect you. The truth of it settled in my bones. Love without respect, exactly what my church friend had warned me about. Are you ready to fight back? Sophie asked. I thought about Robert, how he'd admired my backbone when dealing with difficult doctors or hospital administrators. I'd lost that backbone somewhere in grief and loneliness. Let my children convince me I was fragile. But I wasn't fragile. I was tired of being managed. Yes, I said. I'm ready. That afternoon, Sophie and I walked down to the resort's main office. Snow crunched under our boots, and the cold air felt sharp and clean in my lungs. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a purpose. Mr. Cole, the general manager, was a pleasant man in his 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. I'd noticed him earlier, greeting guests and handling complaints with quiet efficiency. How can I help you, ladies? He asked, gesturing to chairs in his office. I need to understand the hotel's policies regarding reservations and room access, I said. He nodded. Are you having difficulties with your accommodation? I explained carefully, not airing family drama, just stating facts. I was the reservation holder. The payment came from my account, but I wanted to understand my rights regarding the rooms I'd booked. Mr. Cole pulled up my reservation on his computer. You're listed as the primary guest and payment source for all 5 rooms. That gives you certain authorities, such as room assignments, guest access, billing changes. As long as you're the one paying, you maintain control. He looked at me directly. Mrs. Harris, is there a problem I should be aware of? I appreciated his discretion. I want to ensure that any changes to the reservation require my explicit consent, and I'd like that policy in writing. Absolutely. He printed several pages and highlighted relevant sections. I'll also email you a confirmation for your records. Sophie spoke up. Can you show me where it says who has the authority to cancel rooms? Mr. Cole glanced at me, and I nodded. The primary reservation holder can modify or cancel any part of the booking, with appropriate notice. I felt something settle in my chest, not anger, but steady resolve. These were my rooms, booked with my money, under my name. I wasn't a guest in my own vacation. Thank you, I said. This is very helpful. As we left his office, Sophie squeezed my arm. Feeling better? Getting there, I said. But inside, I felt like I was waking up from a long, confused sleep. That evening, the mobile notary arrived at 7 o'clock sharp. Mrs. Peterson was a brisk woman in her 60s, who handled small-town business with professional efficiency. We met in a quiet corner of the hotel's business center. "What documents do you need witnessed?" she asked, opening her official kit. I'd prepared carefully. First, a simple affidavit stating that I had voluntarily paid for the family vacation, without coercion or confusion, and that I maintained full authority over the reservation. Second, an addendum to the hotel booking, giving me exclusive control over any changes. Mrs. Peterson read through everything. "These are straightforward. Do you understand what you're signing?" "Completely." She stamped both documents with her official seal and recorded the transaction in her log. "You'll want to keep the originals in a safe place." I tucked them into my purse, next to the printed hotel policies Mr. Cole had provided. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had solid ground beneath my feet. Sophie had stayed in my room during the notarization, organizing the evidence she'd collected: chat logs, screenshots, timeline notes. Her organizational skills impressed me. "You could be a paralegal," I told her. She grinned. "I'm thinking forensic accountant. I like following money trails." We ordered room service soup and sandwiches that we ate while planning. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. The family had reservations at the resort's upscale restaurant, another expense I'd unknowingly covered. "Are you going to confront them at dinner?" Sophie asked. I considered. Not yet. I want to see how far they'll push. What if they try to take your credit card? They can try. I patted my purse where the notarized documents rested. But they'll find out I'm not as manageable as they thought. Sophie's smile was fierce. This is going to be epic. I looked at my granddaughter, this ally I'd never expected, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just love, but partnership. Respect. We weren't just family anymore. We were a team. Christmas Eve dinner was a formal affair in the resort's main restaurant. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and a pianist playing holiday classics. I arrived precisely on time, wearing my best dress and the pearl necklace Robert had given me. The family was already seated at a large round table with a view of the frozen lake. They'd arranged themselves with military precision, Sophie next to me, everyone else clustered together on the opposite side. The message was clear: us and her. "Evelyn, you look lovely," Heather said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you." I settled into my chair and opened the leather-bound menu. The prices made me blink. $50 for steak, $30 for salmon. Multiplied by 8 people, this was easily a $400 meal. Charles raised his water glass. "To family Christmas traditions." Everyone toasted except Sophie and me. I sipped my wine and watched the dynamics play out. Dan and Lisa whispered about ski conditions. Heather scrolled through her phone, showing Charles pictures of something. The younger grandchildren played quietly with their devices. "So, Mom," Charles said casually, cutting his steak. "Heather and I were thinking it might be easier if we held on to the room keys. You know, in case of emergencies." "What kind of emergencies?" I asked. "Well, if something happened and you couldn't get to your room, we could help." Dan nodded. "Makes sense. Like a safety backup." I felt Sophie tense beside me. This was it, the play for control. "I appreciate your concern, but I'll keep my own keys." "But Mom," Lisa started. I said no. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Conversations at nearby tables paused. My family stared at me with various expressions of surprise and annoyance. Heather laughed nervously. "Of course, whatever makes you comfortable." But I'd seen the look that passed between Charles and Dan. This wasn't over. The waiter approached with dessert menus. "Can I interest anyone in our holiday trifle? Or perhaps our signature chocolate torte?" "Just coffee for me," I said. "I have some errands to run tonight." "Errands?" Lisa frowned. "Mom, the shops are all closed." "Not all of them." I stood, placing my napkin on the table. "I'll see everyone for breakfast." As I walked away, I heard Charles mutter, "Here we go with the drama." But I wasn't creating drama. For the first time in months, I was preventing it. Back in my room, I laid out every document on the small desk: bank statements, hotel confirmations, the notarized affidavit, printed chat logs, and Mr. Cole's policy emails. Sophie sat cross-legged on the bed, adding timestamps to her phone screenshots. "They're going to escalate tomorrow," she said. I heard Dad and Uncle Dan talking about financial concerns and cognitive issues. My blood chilled. Those were code words for elder abuse, claims the kind that could freeze my accounts and strip my independence. They wouldn't. They would. Uncle Dan mentioned calling the bank about unusual charges. and protecting you from yourself. I stared at the evidence spread before me. Months of careful planning by my own children to isolate and control me, using my love for them as leverage. The hurt was so deep it felt physical. But beneath the pain, something harder was crystallizing. They'd underestimated me, the woman who'd managed hospital budgets, negotiated with insurance companies, and fought medical bureaucrats for her patients' rights. I pulled out my phone and dialed the credit union's after-hours line. When Jasmine's voicemail picked up, I left a detailed message about potential fraud claims and family pressure. Then I called Mr. Patel's office and left another message about urgent estate planning needs. What else? Sophie asked. I looked at my granddaughter, this 16-year-old who'd shown more loyalty in 2 days than my children had in months. We document everything, and tomorrow we take control. Sophie nodded grimly. What's the plan? I smoothed the notarized papers with shaking hands. We remind them who actually holds the power here. Outside, snow continued falling on the lake, peaceful and silent. Inside, I felt like I was preparing for war. But maybe that's what boundaries looked like, not walls, but battle lines drawn with love and self-respect. Christmas morning brought blue skies and fresh snow that sparkled like diamonds on the lake. I dressed carefully my navy blue church dress, sensible shoes, and the cameo brooch that had belonged to my mother. Battle armor for a respectable woman. The family had planned a gift exchange in the main lodge after breakfast. I found them clustered around a massive Christmas tree, wrapped presents scattered beneath the boughs. The younger grandchildren played with new toys, while the adults drank coffee from expensive resort mugs. "Merry Christmas, Mom," Charles said, offering me a small wrapped box. Inside was a gift card to a local restaurant chain. $25. I looked at the small plastic card, then at Sophie, who rolled her eyes dramatically. This was their gift to the woman who'd spent $1,200 on their vacation. How thoughtful, I said evenly. I have something for everyone, too. I pulled out a folder of papers and began handing out copies. These are copies of the hotel reservation confirmation, the payment receipts, and the bank records showing the transaction. Lisa frowned at her papers. Mom, what is this? Documentation, I said pleasantly. I realized we never discussed the financial arrangements for this trip. Dan looked up from his copy. Financial arrangements? The $1,200 I paid for everyone's rooms, meals, and activities. I thought we should clarify how that works. Silence fell over the group. Even the children sensed the shift in atmosphere and quieted their playing. Charles cleared his throat. Mom, we said we'd settle up. When? I asked. You've been here 3 days, and no one has mentioned money except to ask for my credit card or room keys. Heather's cheeks flushed. We're family. We don't nickel and dime each other. You're right, I agreed. Families don't use each other. They don't exclude and manipulate and manage each other either. Sophie watched from across the circle, her phone discreetly recording. My backup and my witness. I think you're overreacting, Lisa said carefully. I pulled out the printed chat logs and placed them on the coffee table. No drama Xmas, I read aloud. Classic guilt trips. She always makes everything about her. Should I continue? The color drained from my daughter's face. You've made your feelings very clear, I said. Now I'm making mine clear too. The aftermath of my Christmas morning revelation was swift and predictable. Charles tried damage control, insisting the chat messages were taken out of context. Lisa accused Sophie of betraying family privacy. Dan muttered about stirring up trouble and ruining Christmas. But I wasn't finished. I've made some other arrangements, I said calmly. Still seated in my chair, like a queen holding court, Adult Protective Services has my number on file as a precaution. Mr. Raj Patel, an estate attorney, is expecting my call about updating my will and trust, and the credit union has detailed notes about this trip and any potential fraud claims. That got their attention. Charles leaned forward, his salesman smile slipping. Mom, there's no need for lawyers. I agree. There wouldn't be, if you treated me with basic respect. We do respect you, Lisa protested. Respect isn't excluding someone from meals they paid for. It's not discussing their mental capacity behind their back or plotting to take their keys and credit cards. Heather stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We're concerned about you, Evelyn. You're becoming paranoid. The word hung in the air like a weapon. Paranoid, another code word for diminished capacity. Grounds for protective interventions. Sophie spoke up for the first time. She's not paranoid if they're really planning to control her. Stay out of this, Sophie, Dan snapped. This is adult conversation. My granddaughter's chin lifted defiantly. I am an adult, old enough to see manipulation when it happens. I felt a surge of pride in this brave girl, who'd refused to be intimidated. Here's what's going to happen, I said, rising to face my children. You can apologize, and we can salvage what's left of this Christmas, or you can continue treating me like a problem to be managed. Charles and Lisa exchanged glances. I could almost see them calculating the cost of losing my financial support. The awkwardness of family gatherings, the logistics of elder care without my cooperation. We're sorry you feel this way, Charles said finally. Feel this way? Not sorry for what they'd done, sorry for my reaction to it. I nodded slowly. That tells me everything I need to know. I gathered my papers and headed for the door. Behind me, voices erupted in argument, blame and justification and damage control. But I kept walking. The real battle was just beginning. That afternoon, I found refuge in the hotel's small library. A quiet room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. Sophie joined me there, bringing hot chocolate from the cafe and a fierce expression. They're planning something, she said without preamble. I heard Dad on the phone with someone about financial protections and competency evaluations. My hands stilled on the book I'd been pretending to read. Are you sure? He kept using phrases like best interests and before it's too late. And he asked about getting power of attorney. The room suddenly felt too small. Power of attorney legal control over my finances and decisions. Once they had that, I'd become a ward of my own children, dependent on their goodwill for every purchase and choice. There's more, Sophie continued. Mom called someone about documentation and mentioned your recent erratic behavior. Erratic behavior, like standing up for myself, setting boundaries, refusing to be managed. They were building a case for my incompetence. I thought about Robert during his final illness. How helpless he'd felt when nurses and doctors talked around him instead of to him. I'd fought for his dignity then. Now I had to fight for my own. What can I do? I asked my granddaughter. Sophie pulled out her phone. Document everything first. I've got recordings of their conversations, but we need more. Medical records showing you're competent, bank statements proving you manage your finances responsibly, character references. At 16, she was thinking like a lawyer. I felt simultaneously proud and heartbroken that she had to. Your church friends would vouch for you, she continued. Pastor Johnson, too. And you volunteer at the hospital, they'd have records of your reliability. I nodded, making mental lists. What else? We get ahead of their story. If they're going to claim you're incompetent, we prove you're not. Outside the library windows, families played in the snow, building snowmen and having snowball fights. Normal families enjoying normal vacations. I envied them their simplicity. But I wasn't going to surrender my life to avoid conflict. If my children wanted a war, they'd get one. Help me make some calls, I said. Sophie smiled grimly. Let's do this. Evening brought another family dinner. This one tense with unspoken strategies. We gathered in the resort's casual restaurant, where the atmosphere was supposed to be relaxed and cheerful. Instead, it felt like a negotiation between hostile parties. Charles had obviously coached everyone. They were aggressively normal, asking about my meal, complimenting my outfit, including me in conversation about tomorrow's weather. The sudden attention felt more insulting than the previous exclusion. We thought we might visit the local historical society tomorrow, Lisa said brightly. You love history, Mom. I did love history, but this invitation came with strings attached. I could see it in their eyes, the careful assessment, the mental note-taking for future reports about my interests and capabilities. That sounds nice, I said neutrally. Dan leaned forward. We were also thinking about practical things. You know, while we're all together, maybe updating some of your financial arrangements, making sure everything's organized. There it was. The pitch for power of attorney, disguised as helpful planning. My finances are quite organized, thank you. Of course, Charles said smoothly. We just want to make sure you have support if you need it. Backups, emergency contacts, that sort of thing. Heather nodded sagely. It's really about protecting you. Protection. The word they'd used to justify taking control of my life. Sophie kicked my ankle under the table, a warning. I glanced at her and saw her phone positioned to record audio. I appreciate your concern, I said carefully, but I'm not ready for that level of support yet. But Mom, Lisa pressed, what if something happened? What if you got confused or... Confused about what? I interrupted. My name? My address? My bank account balance? The fact that I paid for this entire vacation while you all planned behind my back? The neighboring tables had gone quiet again. My family's faces showed various shades of embarrassment and anger. You're being dramatic, Dan muttered. Am I, or am I being clear? I stood, leaving money on the table for my meal. Enjoy your dessert. I have some calls to make. As I walked away, I heard Charles's voice. This proves exactly what we were talking about. But I'd gotten what I came for their real agenda. Recorded for posterity. The gloves were officially off. Back in my room, I spread the documents across the desk again and began making calls. First, Pastor Johnson at my home church in Massachusetts. Evelyn, how wonderful to hear from you. How's your family vacation? Complicated, I said honestly. Pastor, I need a favor. I may need character references soon. People who can speak to my mental competency and judgment. There was a pause. Is everything all right? I explained the situation carefully, without dramatic flourishes or emotional appeals. Just facts, the financial manipulation, the group chat, the plans for power of attorney. I'm so sorry, Evelyn. Of course I'll provide a reference. You're one of our most reliable volunteers, sharp as a tack, and twice as organized as people half your age. Relief flooded through me. Thank you. Next, I called Dr. Martinez, my primary physician back home. Her answering service took a message about needing medical records for legal purposes. Then, I contacted the hospital, where I volunteered, asking for documentation of my service. Sophie returned from dinner with a grim expression. They're meeting in Dad's room right now. I couldn't get close enough to hear, but there was lots of paper shuffling and phone calls. They're moving fast, I said. So are we. She showed me her phone. I've uploaded everything to cloud storage with timestamps. The recordings, the screenshots, your bank statements. Even if they take your phone or papers, we have backups. Smart girl. I felt another surge of pride in my granddaughter. There's something else, she said quietly. I heard them talking about cutting the trip short. Packing up tomorrow and driving home. My heart clenched. Of course, remove me from the controlled environment of the hotel. Get me back to familiar territory where they could implement their plans more easily. Not yet, I said firmly. We're not done here. Sophie nodded. What's the plan? I looked at the evidence spread before us. The phone full of recordings, the list of character witnesses. My children thought they were protecting themselves by acting quickly. They were about to learn that their mother was far from helpless. I barely slept that night, my mind racing through contingencies and strategies. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I dressed in my most professional outfit, the navy suit I'd worn to Robert's funeral, and went to find Mr. Cole. I found him in his office at 7 a.m., already working through paperwork with a cup of coffee. Mrs. Harris, you're up early. How can I help you? I need to make some changes to my reservation, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. He pulled up my account. What kind of changes? I want to revoke access to all rooms except mine. As of 10 o'clock this morning, the other room keycards should be deactivated. Mr. Cole looked at me carefully. That's certainly within your rights as the reservation holder. May I ask why? I appreciated his professionalism. There are family disputes about payment and decision-making. I need to clarify who actually controls this booking. He nodded. I'll need that in writing, and I'd recommend having security present when the cards are deactivated. Family conflicts can escalate quickly. I agree. Can you arrange that? Absolutely. I'll also prepare a formal notice explaining the situation for the affected parties. Relief washed over me. Finally, someone treating me like a competent adult making reasonable decisions. There's one more thing, I said. I'd like to schedule a mobile notary to witness some additional documents. Today, if possible. I can arrange that as well. As I left his office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: control over my own life. My children had forgotten something important. I'd been managing difficult situations and unreasonable people for 40 years. They'd just never been on the receiving end before. At 9:30, I sent a text to the family group chat. Please meet me in the lobby at 10 a.m. Important family discussion. Then Sophie and I went downstairs to wait. The reckoning had arrived. At exactly 10 o'clock, my family gathered in the lobby, looking confused and slightly irritated by the early morning summons. Charles wore his patient expression, the one he used with difficult insurance customers. Lisa clutched her coffee like armor. Mr. Cole appeared beside me, professional and calm, with a security guard in a dark suit. "What's all this about, Mom?" Charles asked, eyeing the hotel staff nervously. "Room keycard deactivation," I said simply. "Effective immediately, only I have access to the rooms I booked and paid for." The words hit them like physical blows. Dan stepped forward aggressively. "You can't do that. We have stuff in those rooms. You have 15 minutes to collect your belongings," Mr. Cole said smoothly. "The bellhop staff will assist you." "This is insane," Heather said, her voice rising. "Evelyn, you're being completely irrational." I pulled out my folder of documents, the ones I'd been organizing for days. "I'm being documented." I handed each adult a packet containing their portion of the evidence hotel receipts, with my name and credit card, the group chat screenshots, bank records showing the loan I'd taken, and character references from Pastor Johnson and my doctor. "This is everything," I said calmly. "The financial manipulation, the planning behind my back, the attempts to gain control of my decisions and resources." Lisa flipped through her packet, her face growing pale. "Sophie gave you private conversations." Sophie showed me that my own children were conspiring to manage me like a problem to be solved. Charles tried his professional smile. "Mom, we can discuss this rationally." We tried discussion. You chose manipulation instead. The security guard stepped forward as Dan's face reddened. "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" "No problem," I said. "These people are checking out early." "Like hell we are," Dan snapped. "I'm calling the police." "Please do," I said evenly. I'd be happy to explain to them how my children plan to file false reports about my mental competency to gain control of my finances. That stopped him cold. The implications of filing false police reports, especially regarding elder abuse, were serious. Mr. Cole cleared his throat. "If everyone could collect their belongings, we can resolve this quickly and quietly." My children looked at each other, calculating their options. They were realizing, perhaps for the first time, that I held all the cards literal and metaphorical. The next 30 minutes were controlled chaos. My children and their spouses hurried to pack their belongings, while hotel staff supervised and the security guard maintained order. The younger grandchildren cried, confused by the sudden upheaval, while Sophie helped me maintain my resolve. "You're destroying this family," Lisa said as she dragged luggage past me in the lobby. "I'm saving myself from this family," I replied. Charles made one last attempt at negotiation. "Mom, if you'll just listen." I did listen. "For months, I listened to you plan around me, exclude me, and plot to control me. Now it's time for you to listen." I pulled out one final document, a letter I'd written the night before. "This is a formal notice that I'm reviewing my will and estate plans. Mr. Patel will be handling the updates." The blood drained from Charles's face. "You're cutting us out?" "I'm considering all my options. Just like you were." Dan started toward me aggressively, but the security guard moved between us. "Sir, I need you to step back." "She's making a huge mistake," Dan said, but he backed away. "The mistake was trusting you to treat me with basic respect," I said. Sophie appeared at my elbow, her backpack over her shoulder. "Grandma, can I stay with you?" The question hung in the air. My granddaughter, choosing sides in this family war. Lisa stepped forward. "Sophie, you're coming home with us." "Actually, she's 16, I said. "Old enough to make her own choice about where she wants to be." Sophie looked at her parents, then at me. "I want to stay with Grandma." "Like hell," Dan started. But Mr. Cole interrupted. "Perhaps we should discuss custody arrangements calmly and privately." I looked at my son-in-law, this man who just tried to intimidate me in front of hotel security. "Sophie is welcome to stay with me as long as she wants." The look of fury on Dan's face was almost frightening. But I'd faced down plenty of bullies in my nursing career. I wasn't intimidated anymore. "This isn't over," he said as they headed for the door. "Yes," I said quietly. "It is." After my family left, the lobby felt strangely quiet. Sophie and I sat in the big leather chairs by the fireplace, processing what had just happened. The magnitude of it was sinking in. I'd just severed relationships with my children, possibly permanently. But I didn't feel regret. I felt relief. "Are you okay?" Sophie asked. "I'm better than I've been in months," I said honestly. Mr. Cole approached us with a gentle expression. "Mrs. Harris, I've arranged for you to keep your current room for the rest of the week. No additional charge. And I've canceled the charges for the other rooms you shouldn't pay for accommodations that weren't used." "Thank you. That's very kind. Also, there's a lovely boutique hotel across the lake, the Evergreen Inn. Quieter, more intimate. if you'd prefer a change of scenery for the rest of your stay. I looked at Sophie, who nodded enthusiastically. That sounds perfect. Within an hour, we'd packed our things and caught a taxi across the frozen lake. The Evergreen Inn was everything Mr. Cole had promised: cozy rooms with fireplaces, a small restaurant with homemade soup, and a peaceful atmosphere that felt like a retreat rather than a battleground. That evening, Sophie and I sat by our room's fireplace, sharing Chinese takeout and watching snow fall outside our window. She'd called her parents to let them know she was safe, a conversation that had involved considerable yelling from Dan and tears from Lisa. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" Sophie asked. "Do you think you need their forgiveness for telling the truth?" She considered this. "No, I think they need to earn mine." I looked at my granddaughter with profound respect. At 16, she understood something my adult children had forgotten: that relationships require mutual respect to survive. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Harris, this is Raj Patel. I received your messages. I can meet with you Tuesday at 2 p.m. to discuss your estate planning needs." I showed the message to Sophie, who grinned. "The revolution continues." "Not a revolution," I said. "Evolution. I'm evolving back into who I used to be." Outside, the lake stretched peaceful and white under the moonlight. Inside, for the first time in months, I felt at home. The rest of our Vermont week passed peacefully. Sophie and I explored the small town, visited local shops, and had long conversations about everything from her college plans to my memories of Robert. Without the tension of family manipulation, I felt younger and more energetic than I had in ages. On our last morning, I woke to find Sophie at the small desk, working on her laptop. "What are you doing?" "College application essays," she said, "writing about the importance of standing up for yourself and others, about how courage sometimes means disappointing people who expect you to stay small." I felt tears prick my eyes. This girl who'd risked family anger to show me the truth was now finding her own voice because of it. "Your parents are going to be proud," I said. "Eventually, maybe. Right now they're furious, but I'd rather have them angry at me for doing right than happy with me for staying quiet about wrong." We drove home that afternoon, taking our time on the snowy roads. When we reached Massachusetts, I dropped Sophie at her house, a difficult goodbye that involved promises to stay in touch and plans for regular visits. At my own home, the quiet felt different. Not lonely, but peaceful. I unpacked slowly, putting away clothes and sorting through the documents that had become my armor over the past week. That evening, I called Pastor Johnson to update him on the situation and thank him for his reference. Then I called Dr. Martinez's office to schedule a complete physical and cognitive assessment documentation for my own peace of mind. Finally, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote thank you notes to Mr. Cole, Mrs. Peterson the notary, and Jasmine at the credit union, people who'd treated me with professional respect when my own family had not. The house felt empty, but not hollow. It felt like space to rebuild, to remember who I was before grief and loneliness made me forget my own worth. I had work to do: legal work, emotional work, the hard work of setting boundaries and maintaining them. But for the first time in months, I looked forward to tomorrow. Tuesday's appointment with Mr. Patel exceeded my expectations. His office was warm and professional, filled with law, books, and family photos that suggested someone who understood both legal precision and human relationships. "Mrs. Harris, thank you for coming in. I've reviewed your preliminary information, and I understand you want to update your estate planning." I handed him the folder I'd organized copies of everything from Vermont, along with additional documentation I'd gathered. "I want to ensure my assets are protected and distributed according to my actual wishes, not family assumptions." He read through the materials carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When he finished, he looked at me with serious eyes. "This is unfortunately common. Adult children sometimes lose sight of their parents' autonomy. Tell me what you'd like to accomplish." We spent 2 hours reviewing my current will, discussing trust options, and planning safeguards against future manipulation. Mr. Patel explained advanced directives, power of attorney limitations, and ways to ensure my wishes would be respected, even if I became incapacitated. "The key is documentation and witnesses," he said. "We want to make it clear that these are your informed decisions, made while you're fully competent." "How do we prove competency?" "Medical evaluation, which you've already scheduled. Character references, which you have. and detailed documentation of your decision-making process, which you've provided extensively. I felt something settle in my chest, the same feeling I'd had when signing the mortgage papers for our first house or completing my nursing certification. The satisfaction of taking control of my own life. There's one more thing, I said. My granddaughter Sophie showed tremendous maturity and courage in this situation. I'd like to establish a college fund for her. Mr. Patel smiled. That can certainly be arranged. As I left his office, I felt like I was walking taller, not just because I'd protected my assets, but because I'd reclaimed my agency. My phone rang as I reached my car. Charles's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back in my driveway, his voice was carefully controlled. Mom, we need to talk. This has gone far enough. But it hadn't gone far enough. It had gone exactly as far as necessary. I deleted the message and went inside to make dinner. For one, by choice, over the following weeks, my new life took shape. I established routines that pleased me, rather than accommodating others' expectations. Morning coffee on my porch, afternoon volunteer shifts at the hospital, evening phone calls with Sophie, who was thriving despite her parents' continued anger. The legal work progressed smoothly. Dr. Martinez's evaluation confirmed excellent cognitive function for my age. My updated will and trust documents were properly witnessed and filed. I even established the college fund for Sophie, something that gave me deep satisfaction. My children made several attempts at reconciliation, but each one involved demands that I apologize for my overreaction and return to our previous dynamics. When I refused, they accused me of being stubborn and vindictive. They couldn't understand that I wasn't punishing them, I was protecting myself. The real test came when Charles showed up at my house, unannounced on a Sunday afternoon. I saw his car in the driveway and considered not answering the door. But avoidance wasn't the same as boundaries. Hello, Charles, I said, not inviting him inside. Mom, this is ridiculous. We're family. Yes, we are. But family doesn't mean I have to accept disrespect and manipulation. He tried his salesman charm, then anger, then guilt. None of it moved me. I'd heard all these arguments from difficult patients and their families during my nursing career. You're being selfish, he said finally. I'm being honest. There's a difference. After he left, I called Sophie to check in. She was doing well, maintaining her grades and staying active in AV Club. Her parents had stopped trying to punish her for siding with me, perhaps realizing that their daughter's respect couldn't be commanded. I'm proud of you, Grandma, she said. You taught me that love without respect isn't really love. That night, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and my spiral notebook, the same one I'd carried through nursing school. I wrote 3 words piece. Purpose. Power. Not power over others, but power over my own choices. The power to say no, to set boundaries, to live according to my own values rather than others' expectations. It had taken 67 years and a failed family vacation to remember who I was. But better late than never. Spring brought renewal in more ways than one. My garden, neglected during the dark months of grief and confusion, responded to attention with eager growth. Sophie visited most weekends, helping with planting and sharing college acceptance letters. She'd been accepted to 3 excellent schools with partial scholarships. The college fund I'd established would cover the rest, ensuring she could pursue her dreams without the burden of debt. I want to study forensic accounting, she announced during one visit, kneeling beside me in the herb garden. Help people who've been financially manipulated. I felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. My granddaughter had found her calling through our family's dysfunction. That's important work, I said. I learned from the best. You showed me that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. My children had largely stopped their reconciliation attempts, perhaps finally understanding that I wasn't going to bend. Instead, they sent obligatory cards on holidays and maintained polite distance. It wasn't the family relationship I'd once wanted, but it was honest. The real surprise came in May, when Lisa called to ask if Sophie could spend the summer with me before starting college. Dan and I think she needs time away from the tension, Lisa said carefully, and she wants to be with you. It was an olive branch of sorts, not an apology, but an acknowledgement that Sophie and I had formed our own bond separate from their approval or disapproval. She's always welcome here, I said. That evening, I updated my will again, adding a provision for Sophie's wedding fund and a donation to the local Adult Protective Services program. Mr. Patel had become not just my attorney, but a friend, someone who understood the importance of protecting vulnerable adults from family predators. "You've created quite a legacy," he said as we reviewed the documents. "Not just financial, but educational." I knew what he meant. The story of our family conflict had become a case study in his practice, helping other elderly clients recognize and respond to manipulation. My phone rang as I drove home from his office. Sophie's name on the screen. "Grandma, I graduate next week. Will you come?" "Wouldn't miss it," I said. "I'll be the proudest person in that auditorium." Because I'd learned something important in Vermont family isn't just blood. It's respect, loyalty, and love freely given rather than demanded. 1 year after Vermont, I stood in my kitchen making apple pies for the church fundraiser. The same routine that had once felt lonely and repetitive. But now it felt purposeful, connected to a community that valued my contributions. Sophie called while the pies cooled on the counter. She was finishing her first semester of college with a 3.8 GPA and had already declared her major in forensic accounting. "I'm writing a paper about elder financial abuse," she said. "Professor Wilson wants to use our story as a case study if you're comfortable with that." "Use it," I said. "If it helps one person recognize manipulation, it's worth sharing." Charles and Lisa sent Christmas cards but no invitations. Dan had remarried and moved to Florida. The family I'd once centered my life around had largely evaporated, but the grief I'd expected never came. Instead, I felt liberated, free to make choices based on my own values, to spend money on things that brought me joy, to form relationships with people who respected my autonomy. The doorbell rang as I wrapped the last pie. Pastor Johnson stood on my porch, holding a clipboard and wearing a hopeful expression. "Evelyn, we're organizing a mission trip to help build housing for low-income families. We could use someone with your organizational skills and medical background." 2 years ago, I would have hesitated, worried about being away from family obligations. Now I felt excitement spark in my chest. "Tell me more," I said. As he outlined the project, I realized this was what my life looked like, now purposeful, respected, autonomous. I wasn't the excluded mother sitting alone at resort counters. I wasn't the managed elderly woman whose children made decisions for her. I was Evelyn Harris, retired nurse, volunteer, woman of faith, and survivor. I was someone who'd learned that setting boundaries wasn't cruel. It was necessary. That love without respect was just obligation wearing a prettier name. That evening, I opened my spiral notebook and wrote one final entry: "Family isn't blood. It's love and respect, both freely given, both freely earned." Outside, snow began falling again, but it looked different than it had in Vermont. Not like an ending, but like a beginning. I was 68 years old, and I was finally free. That's all for today's story. If you enjoyed it, please hit subscribe and like, and share in the comments where you're listening from. I truly appreciate your support. On the screen, you'll see 2 more stories I recommend. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next story.